It's been about 3 minutes, and so this paint has had time to dry a little bit. So what we're going to do now is take a size 5 round brush, moisten it a little bit. Now this is key, okay? I've dipped it in my water pot, and now I'm going to flick it. Right, I flicked it really hard to get rid of the excess blob, but this amount of water that's left on my hairs of my brush will do some magic, and I'll show you. What I'm going to do now is soften some of those ridges we made, because where they are going into a snow gully, they might be a bit melted, mightn't they? So with this slightly moist brush, let's just paint over very carefully some of the more scraggy parts, you know, the sort of very small little speckledy bits that you can see. Just moisten them a little bit to reactivate them, and then this gives us a faint veil of green, pale green. Don't do them all because we want some hard white bits to indicate snow on the caps. So that now, I'm just going to turn my light off and see if that's better. That's better, right. So that's given us this melted feel. So I'll do a little bit more on the distant one. I'm going to rinse my brush, dry the handle again. Now dip the hairs only in the water and flick it. Let's move on to this area. So you see, by painting this, you activate it slightly, and you can brush it down then over the trees because they'll be darker anyway, and we get this sort of blending away to nothingness with this slightly moist brush. Rinse again because now my brush is full of that dissolved green paint. Flick it. Don't wipe it in a flannel or a face cloth, just keep that slight moisture in the brush, and this will give you very nice snow melted effects, but we don't want to lose all the white of the paper. So that's that side done. See, it's very different to this side, isn't it? So rinse my brush again, flick it, and let's brush down and moisten. Just moistens it a little bit and gets it dissolving slightly to make these ridges have a bit more of a gradated effect. So I've rinsed my brush again, I flicked it. Sorry to keep repeating this, but it's really important. This is one of the key things in watercolour that you need to know, and you miss it at your peril really, because watercolour responds to fine changes in detail such as this. So in some places I'm going to melt that quite a bit, so you melt it by insisting and keeping painting on top of it, and the water dissolves that pigment, and then you can get a darker, see a darker V like a gully coming down there. Right, so already that's given us a slightly different look, and I like that this peak is sort of hanging in mid-air because of the snow has been allowed to just exist around this area. Okay, so now we're ready for, oh, I forgot a little bit, see that distant bit there? That can be just a bit of tiny bit of, and that's too dark, add more water, a little bit of distant green to suggest a very distant mountain range. I'm going to paint that in now. I'm going to rinse my brush, flick it hard, and then just brush up to take some of that out. Now I'll let that all dry and then we'll get on. Oh, sorry, forgot also this one here, this mountain range here. What I'm going to do with this one, I'm going to pretend it's all snow with a bit of greenery, soft greenery at the bottom. So I'm going to moisten it with a size 5 round brush, which has just got clear water on there. So moisten that, and don't worry if you cover the trees underneath, just moisten it down so that that whole slide of the mountain is moist. And then I'm going to pick up some of this soft, runny, emerald greeny colour that we've been using, which was Winsor Blue green shade and a little bit of burnt umber, and I'll just drop that in about 2/3 of the way down, leaving the top third white, just to give it a little bit of a covering. Right, so I'm going to let everything dry now and see you in the next clip. We're going to do the trees, this is bone dry now. We're going to do all of these middle distance trees as one big blob first of all, and we're going to leave this area here white, as if it was a snowy bank by the lake. So the colour we're going to use for the bank of trees, right, I'm using my 1/2 inch flat for this, is going to be that same colour mix, which was Winsor Blue green shade. Make sure you've got a big enough puddle to do the whole bank of trees. You know, don't be mean on the paint. Winsor Blue green shade. It's better to have more than to not have enough and then run out and have to mix a new batch when you're in the middle of a painting. Then some of that burnt umber. Oh, that's lovely, right. That's a strong green. Maybe it's a little bit too strong, so I don't want it to compete too much with the mountains. So to weaken it, I can spray on some water, or you can add a pipette with water. This will dry paler than it is as well, so bear that in mind. And you can only do that with experience, you know, by seeing how the paint's dry. So that's runny enough, I think. And at the ready, I'm going to have a piece of tissue paper, because I'll be blotting out in places. Right, so let's go. Now, we're painting on dry paper now. So let's just get all of the trees in. This is going to be just, I'm doing this in a little bit patchy, you see, leaving some chinks here and there. These are the sort of shadow trees, alright? These won't be the finished trees, but we're making just sort of triangular towers, aren't we? And there's a big one that goes right up there and it cuts. I'm using the flat of the brush now, you see? See, patting the colour on like that. Pat the colour on and just drag some triangular shapes. Let's have that one much taller. Don't worry about the branches and the limbs sticking out and how they stick out. That's come in later on. This is the shadow bank of trees that will support these trees. We are currently painting these trees. So again, I'm making it a broken edge at the bottom. You know, I don't want it to be solid block of colour, because trees enter the ground in erratic and irregular ways, don't they? Asymmetry is more common in something like this than a perfect line of trees. So we're nearly there now. We're just popping in this middle distance. Let's have one just breaking out a bit higher, you know, just to change things a little bit. And if you can see, my application of paint is quite generous. You know, that's the moisture I've got. It's not dripping off my brush, but it's nice and moist, but it's pigmented. And so when I'm putting it on, I know that in a second when I press my tissue paper on, I'll be able to lift some off and get a nice effect, get a varied effect. So let's have that one coming right up there, over this mountain range. Sorry. Again, if you are watching this video and you're not painting yet, practice doing the trees on a bit of scrap paper. These are all techniques. You can't be expected to take in everything straight away from any tutorial. When I'm learning stuff on YouTube, I need a couple of goes at it. Right, so they're all on there now. They look a little bit like soldiers, even though I've tried to keep them a bit irregular. So to add a bit of atmosphere now, I'm going to twist a piece of tissue paper like that, and just say like about a quarter of the way up. Let's do this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Right, so I've lost a lot of them in the mist. Just untwist the paper and twist it again. Twist it again now. I want to lose some of the hard edges in the snowy bank there, so press tissue in, and as you see, you've diminished the importance of where they hit the ground. Let's do some rocking. So we're just patting and taking some of this paint away. Try and use a clean piece of tissue as you do that, otherwise you're going to press some blue back into the sky or whatever. So that's where we are now. So we've got some ghosted trees. Finally, just one more thing before we do the next section. With this little flat brush, I'm going to moisten it slightly, and again I'm going to give it a flick, a real hard flick, and then I want to soften down. So wiggle. You have to do this quickly because Winsor Blue is a bit of a staining paint, and if you don't soften it quite soon, a few seconds after you've painted it in, it's harder to dissolve. So I'm just going to wiggle and coax out some of the very bottom bits of that Winsor Blue mix, so it melts into the snow. So I'm getting a feeling of soft edge there. See, and then I'm dragging it down. Rinse my brush again, because I've got a lot of blue on there now, and flick it again. Let's move over here perhaps. Just rotate and wiggle and try and dissolve that hard edge that's forming quite soon after you've painted it, and that just gives us a softer edge, especially near the end of this edge here, you know, at the side of the painting, because we want a soft edge there so that the viewer's eye doesn't go shoots out on the hard line. Hard lines take your viewer's eye out of the painting. So I'm wiggling the brush, and then the hairs of the brush are touching the paper, right? So let's look at that now. Again, there's a hard edge over this side, so let's kill that hard edge. So rinse my brush again, and in fact I'm going to, this whole tree, you know, it's a bit hard there, so I'm going to flip my brush and I'm going to moisten it, wiggle, 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 dissolve it, and dissolve the hard edge there, just diminish its hardness, moisten that. Moisten my brush again, rinse my brush again, flick it, and quickly try and just soften this hard edge at the far right of the paper of the painting. Again, don't hang about, you've got to do the softening and dissolving quite quickly, especially with a paint like Winsor Blue, that's quite staining, and you'll get to know your paints over time. Right, so let's have a look now. Rinse my brush again, flick it, and I can just take that blob out of the way. Okay, so let's get on now to the harder trees, but we need to let this dry first. The painting is bone dry again now, and as you can see, the middle distance trees are dried, a bit paler, and they've got some lovely, you know, sort of broken areas that we achieved by patting the dry tissue into them. Something's jumping out at me, and it's this separator between the snowy hill and the distant mountain. What I'm going to do is just help that separation a bit more. So with my a 1/4 inch flat brush, I'm going to pick up some of the colour that I had left on my palette from the middle distance trees, and I'm going to paint that. Let me zoom in for you. I'm going to paint that in here. And then very quickly, with a size 5 round brush that I've wetted and flicked, just blend that up into the craggy mountain to give this a separator. And then I'm picking some of this colour up on my brush and I'm just going to scumble it, you see, just to lose that shooting line that's going out there. So leaving this with snow and then patting that in there and scumbling it down there. So I'm grafting some paint from there over there. So the line's going up, but it doesn't take us all the way out. You've trapped it in the painting. Keep the viewer in the painting at all times. Alright, so that's that bit there. Similarly, that's letting the viewer escape that side, isn't it? So let's get in there. And again, I'm going to just pick up some of that soft dilute green, blue that I had for the trees, and just brush it in and taper it away. Maybe dislodge, by rubbing on it, dislodge some of this darker blacky blue green, and then flick it, drag it in to unify that. How's that looking? Right, I think we've kept the viewer in now, so we've lost those to escape roots and we're in the middle. So let's go now for our dark trees. We're going to use the same mix but darker. So, and more gooey, more viscous. So I'm picking up a lot more of the Windsor Blue green shade. Quite a lot of paint because we've got quite a few big trees to do. I'm mixing it with what I've got on the palette already, just to use it up. By the way, don't leave this sitting around too long on the palette because it can stain. So if you were going off, in between painting sessions, I'd wipe it down. Then some burnt umber now. Now because the trees are coming forward, they can be a bit warmer, so we can add a bit more brown. They can be a slightly different colour. Because this is such a limited palette, they should be in keeping anyway. So I'm adding more of this burnt umber and a little bit more water. Now again, these are quite stylised trees I'm going to paint, so I'm only going to pick out, say, a cluster of them like I've done there, and maybe one there. Alright. So the way I'm going to do it is with this 1/2 inch flat brush, and I'm going to sort of do a sort of broken line there. Let's have a lower one about there, and then maybe one in front there, a bit smaller. And then with the corner of this brush, I'm going to drag out some tiny top branches, irregular, and have some of them bend down and some of them bend up. Again, if you're not sure, get yourself a picture of a pine tree and really look at it. So I'm scampering out some of these branches. So some are going down. Let me zoom in on that. And this is an art, taking your time to see the direction and form of the branches. But you can get away with murder really, because people know what a pine tree looks like, so you haven't got to, be so accurate. Just want the idea of clumps of branches that have got slightly separated. Now as I'm coming to the base, things flesh out, don't they? They get a lot more dense, right? So I'm using this sort of twisting, stippling effect. Again, allow yourself time to learn how to do this. If you don't want to do it straight on this painting, get a piece of scrap paper. Alright, so that's a bit gappy and random. And again, this one. So little tiny arcs and spurs that give us the idea of a pine tree. Irregularity is what we want. What we don't want is, you know, zoom, boom, 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 boom. We don't want that. We want it to be irregular. And this is where painting slowly comes in, you know, because you're consciously then saying, right, let's have one arm bending down, let's have one flicking up. And now these are going to merge where they're right next door to each other. So don't be afraid to lose and sacrifice part of one of the trees, because they are like that in nature. They are together, butting up against each other. And then this little one. Don't be afraid to leave some air holes, some gaps for birds to fly through as well. So it's a mixture of contrasting space and painted areas. So there's a cluster of 3 there. They're a bit regular actually, never mind. Carry on now. I'm going to have another one right here to break this horizon line. And again, using this tiny little corner of my brush. You can, of course, choose to use your tiny little brush, so let me do a bit with that as well. It's all personal taste. I mentioned these brushes in the beginning because some people might find it tricky to use a big brush like this. If you're a beginner, you might want to get some confidence up doing small little twiddly brushes with small little twiddly shapes with a small brush. So that'll give you fine, very fine tapering little edges, you know, which are lovely, delicate. I'm going to carry on with this for now. So I'm sort of pressing and twisting, you know, twisting. Again, just play with your brushes, get to, oh, that's a bit of a big branch. Then you get to know what they can do. You haven't got to buy a ton of brushes. You can achieve a lot of effects with a minimal amount of brushes. Right, that's a big branch, right? So I need to put another little small pine tree in there to disguise that mistake. Or is it a mistake? Whatever. So there's a little tree there. And I think for balance, and what we can do as well, before I forget, is you can pat some tissue in some areas of the tree and lose parts of it on this one. Pat. You know, you can make some shapes, some highlighted shapes, and that again adds to the organic, natural look of your painting. Let's get a tree over on the far right as well now for a bit of balance. Yeah, this one. So some little top spur branches. They aren't very visible because there's a lot of dark on that ridge. Some sort of stippling and stamping and twisting, and that makes me be less rigid. It makes me just create organic shapes with some bits sticking out so that we haven't got a solid cone. You don't want a solid cone. Okay, so there they are. Now, with a 1/4 inch flat brush, which I've moistened, and I'm going to flick it. Let's get in there now. And once again, do this dissolving. So I'm touching in and coaxing that bottom couple of branches of the tree and making it dissolve in the ground a little bit. so it looks a bit more natural. Rinse my brush again, flick, do the other one, so we lose that edge and the brush hairs are sort of flat on the paper. These ones I'm going to leave those because we want those to be the sort of star of the show. So there's the trees in. So how about now we let that dry, and then we'll start on the watercolour reflections. To do the watercolour reflections, I prefer to work on a vertical and turn my paper, because it's easier for me then to see the symmetry of the mountains, the trees, the sky, mountains, trees and sky this way. I find it easier than trying to do them that way. So I'm going to turn my painting this way. Also, to help me place things well, I'm just going to indicate where there's a tree. Again, this is for learning purposes. I wouldn't normally want a big strong pencil line in there, but I want to see where that tree is, and roughly, you know, where the mountain is. So I'm going to try and sketch in roughly where the mountain range is. There's another little tree there. If you want, you can also get your tracing again and trace it and trace these areas down on the paper if you can't really judge where things are. Again, I'm doing this thoroughly because when you're a beginner and you're trying to do reflections, things can all get out of hand a little bit. Now, because the reflections are probably not going to fit all the way on this paper, I'm using a bit of artistic license, and if some of it gets lost on the edge, that's fine. This tree, you know, we want that in definitely. This tree is there, and then there's a smaller one there, and then this sort of mountain, we can have that reflected in the water there, and it goes up like that. So we've got a rough reflection, symmetrical. Okay, this is a bit higher than that. Do the best you can. So what we need to do now is, with a clean 1/2 inch brush, I'm going to soak the paper, so clean water. All of this area is going to be moistened, but I'm going to leave this strip in the middle as dry, because that's our snowy bank by the lake. So plenty of water on, because we want it to stay moist enough for us to get our reflections. And remember at the start of the painting when we did the sky, remember how moist we had the sky, the sheen on the paper you could see? That's what we want again in the lake. We want that moistness, because that will help us do the reflections. So I'm moistening all of this now and leaving that white strip dry there. I'm going to moisten that area and that area again, so that we haven't got a white chunk at the end where the viewer's eye can shoot out. So the first colour we want to put in here is the colour of the sky, isn't it? But I'm going to change the colour of the sky a little bit. I'm going to make it cobalt blue, because cobalt blue is a bit of a warmer blue, and we want the viewer to think, right, well, this is nearer, so warm colours come nearer. So I'm going to just put in a bit of cobalt blue mixed with a bit of my greeny blue, which was Windsor blue, and a little tiny bit of burnt umber. So we've got 3 colours here, but it mostly is cobalt blue with a tiny bit of what's left on your palette. And then let's just drop that blue in roughly, and again you won't get it exact, but roughly the same as what it is in the sky. Okay, again, be gentle with yourself with this. This is the first time we've done reflections. I'm going to tip that, let it bleed a bit, give it time to get momentum and to gain some traction. It takes a few seconds. Hold it at the vertical like that. And that's bleeding and softening, okay? So now I'm going to rinse my brush, wipe my brush in the flannel and keep this sharp shape. This dark green was more viscous, so we're going to pick up some of the burnt umber and mix it with some of that Windsor blue-green shade. Until we get as near as we can manage. Now this colour, I'm just going to do the one ridge, okay? It is there. I'm roughly copying, you know, the outline that I can see up there. Then I'm going to rinse my brush, flick it. I flicked my brush, but I've just got a bit of moisture left in here. Then I'm going to brush down and drag that green down in towards the lakeside. Let me zoom in on this one so you can see it. So clean brush again, slightly moist, drag down this colour while it's still moist on the paper. Just drag it down so it softens. There. Now I'm going to pick up some more of the dark green brown for these trees. So it's quite viscous, quite gooey. Now the trees, I'm going to drag in like that, and again it's this twisting, stamping, and they're bigger at the base. I'm trying to echo it roughly. There's a little tree there and a smaller one there, and again wider at the base, and they merge a little bit, don't they? Let's move on to this big clump of trees here. That actually shoots off the page. Oops. Positioning of that isn't brilliant. This is the second tree. All we're after are reflections. This hasn't got to be accurate. We just want a green blur. Right, so I've got all my things in position roughly. I could do with a bit of this colour here, couldn't I? So I'm going to rinse my brush and pick up a very sort of dilute blue and just drop it in. Just a dilute blue, whatever you can pick up on the palette. Right, now that I've got the reflections in, and they've had a few seconds to soak into the paper, I'm going to again rinse this 1/2 inch flat brush, flick it, but leave it moist like that. And now I'm going to start at the lakeside edge and drag. Turn your brush over, drag. Turn your brush over, drag. Turn your brush over, drag. And I would now rinse my brush again because I've picked up a lot of pigment. Rinse it, flick it, drag, turn your brush over, drag, turn your brush over, drag. And you can see you were getting softness. So drag it again, turn, drag, turn it, drag. Rinse your brush, drag it, turn it, drag it, turn it, drag it. And this softens things. Rinse again, drag your brush. But it doesn't lose everything, it just softens things a lot. So I'm going to rinse my brush now and just show you this, you know, doing its melting effect. So things are now just merging and blurring down. I could have done a lot better on the colour of the trees, sorry, but I hope you get the idea of how to create reflections. So that's the way it's looking now. See if I can show you the moisture in there still. Yeah, see there's moisture all in there. Right. So at this stage now, come along again with your 1/2 inch flat brush. Rinse it very well. Now this time I am going to dry it very well, and I'm drying the hairs. Now in this last minute or so, the painting, you know, has had a chance to soak in the water, and so now is a good time to use your brush in a vertical drop down position like this, vertical, and touch it in and drag out a highlight, a ripple. You need to rinse your brush again, dry it again very well, and keep that sharp shape. You might need to do it again because the paint can sometimes still seep in. I'm trying to keep those horizontal. Let's go for one. So I'm doing this idea, okay? But I'm doing it vertically, so I keep the sharp edge of the brush. Try and keep these reflections horizontal with your paper. Okay, and that's basically it. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. I was going to do the stones in the water, but I think for today we've done enough, okay? So keep on lifting. If you feel your ripples are disappearing, which they probably will because the painting is still active, you can just keep on dragging out the colour with a moist brush. Actually, before we go, I just want to try one more thing, is I'm going to try and darken these trees a bit more, just to show you you can work in it while it's still got a little bit more moisture left in the paper. So I'm mixing more of the Winsor Blue Green shade and the Burnt Umber to just try and give it one more push to get these trees to be much darker. So let's drag that in, and that one, and that one. That's a bit of a better colour, isn't it? Yeah, that's a bit darker, that's better. And it'll still be a softish edge because the paper has still got enough moisture in it to achieve that. And I'm going to cut in to that snowy area a little bit. It's a bit of a better colour match. Again, if I had more time, I could have taken more time with this, but you get the idea. So as above, so below with reflections. It's symmetry you're after to create this feeling of the reflection in the lake. And these trees could have done with an extra layer of this colour because they'd faded quite a lot in the moisture of the paper. Okay, and I think we're going to call it a day there. Right, thanks for watching. See you in the next video. If you want the outline, just email me and I can send you the outline and the reference photograph. Thanks for watching. Bye. Sorry, finally I forgot to say, I went back in then, after I'd put these darker trees, and I lifted out the ripples once more, rinsing each time and wiping my brush each time. Thanks for watching.